Welcome back to Power Watch Business. It is my pleasure to have on Brady Dahmer. Brady, how are you doing, man?
Doing great. It's sunny. It's gorgeous here in Vancouver today. So, I can't be happier after all this rain we've had this spring. So, yep, feeling good. I'm so happy to be on this with you. I can't wait to kind of get into the get talking and get into the business. So, yeah.
I love it. I appreciate your time. And as you know, our channel is about small business and trying to get that 9 to 5 grind off of your back and then really jumping into the hard stuff and doing small business and being
Yeah.
your own boss. So that's probably harder than the 9 to 5 grind, but it's certainly a way to move up.
That it is, and I gotta say it's twice as hard, but 5 times as rewarding, right? So that's why we do it. So
Absolutely
yeah,
correct. I couldn't present it more.
yeah,
And you've been in this business for a long time. You're a marketing expert.
yep.
How long have you been? Give us a little brief description of your background.
Yeah, I've been in the industry probably 30 plus years now, and I was one of those fortunate but unfortunate kids that kind of knew early on the industry I wanted to be in. I just right from high school I loved advertising and marketing, and that's what my brain liked to remember too. Math and everything else, it just I couldn't hold two numbers in my brain, but when it comes to art and marketing and messaging, that's really where I got really excited. And for me, it was, yeah, that was my thing. So my path led me right from school right through to I worked at multiple agencies, like large agencies in Toronto, where I felt like I was a small cog in a very big wheel, and I just didn't feel some of the creativity. Like I just wanted to do more and be more creative. That entrepreneurial spirit was in it was starting to burn brighter. And so after about 12 years in corporate life, I jumped ship and I started to go it on my own. And thankfully this industry, it's open to more freelance kind of work. So we can kind of get side projects. It's much more open to the kind of, I would say, side hustle, but contracting and being doing jobs. So that for me that's escalating up from that. Obviously, everybody's seen those memes of this. It's never that straight line. There's always those bumps and everything in between. And that for me is just it's been part of that. And so it's just marketing and branding strategy. I partnered up with some new partners that really focus on understanding, getting data and insights. And of course, with AI and stuff like that, it makes it a lot more easy to capture those and use those, especially now for small businesses. But our agency functions at a very kind of high level, but I've always loved the entrepreneurial spirit of getting on the ground level and teaching the small business entrepreneurs how to get going and how to be as successful as they can, especially when it comes to their campaigns and getting their brand out there and things like that.
Yeah, and that leads us into your book that it's available on Amazon now, but you really haven't launched yet. Like this is the soft launch. Is that correct?
It is, yeah. So we're warming up, we're getting her going. So it's just getting out there and talking. It's kind of like the marathon analogy. It's like training is is only a small part of it. Training only gets you to the start line, and then you got to go. And that was for me that the book is just writing and finishing it. It took probably when they say about the book idea probably happened about 4.5 years ago, but probably 3 years to write it. One of those things where every now and again you come up with a new idea, and the idea kept on morphing and or getting better. And I did the research, and I waited till I really wanted to build something that was going to be really thoughtful, because I for myself do not like. I wanted to provide as much value as I possibly could for everybody, and that really came down to writing the book, testing it, putting it out to my peers. And it's that back and forth. So over the last couple of years, and one of the key things is I hired a professional editor as well, and he he loved it, but he gave me some really great ideas, to which it was reformatted. Like one of those things where someone drops a little golden nugget in your lap, but it also means that you might have to go back quite a few steps to rebuild it up, and that's kind of happened a few times. But that for me is kind of the work. I'm exceptionally happy to where it's at now, because it's hitting on all the notes and all the targets I really want to, and everybody that kind of gets it is just like, wow, I really kind of wish I had this a month ago, or I got to give this to 5 other people that are starting a business, because it just feels I tried to put as much value in it, because for me, we're all busy, and it's nothing's kind of worse than reading a book or watching something, or to realize that they're not really giving you the meat. They're just kind of like skimming it, and there's an offer. There's a bigger offer, something they're trying to sell at the end, which is like nothing's more frustrating than being pitched. Being kind of
Well,
like talked into something and have it really be a shallow kind of light knowledge. So for me, that was that was super important. So I'm that for me that's kind of where I'm at. Yeah, with the book, and super happy with it and what it delivers and teaches people. So yeah.
I agree. And it's very, very practical. I mean, throughout the thing, you have checklists on different products. So you're talking about one subject and you have a checklist. You talk about another subject and you have a checklist. And it's and we say this on this channel all the time. Everybody knows what to do, but nobody actually does it to where they need to be, right?
Yep.
I mean, one of the places you start is your customers, knowing your customers. And the questions you have in the book about finding out who your customer is just goes, it's not superficial. It really gets down into them.
It does, and that's kind of when it's just like, oh, my customers like live nearby and have a car and can walk here, but really, if you look at some of the greatest brands that are out there, they really understand, to some extent, the emotional needs, or the needs and wants of their client. And that's kind of when you want to know your customers, it goes beyond that, and that really will help you hone in on who you are, but also the product or service that you're providing, because nothing's worse than kind of like putting a product out there that misses those targets because you don't know who those people are. To use a really great sports analogy, it's like if you don't study the opposing team in any way, what their strengths and their weaknesses are, you're just walking in blind. And you might win by accident, or you could be absolutely decimated, and they could walk all over you. So it's best to know those both strengths and weaknesses, so you can play off of each one for what your own strengths and weaknesses are. So that's in understanding the clients, but also the competition. And one of the things is that the more the better decisions you can make. And that's such a key thing for us. It's that if you don't know a lot, you're always going to pick the most sort of safest decision, which, again, the safest decision, especially when it comes to marketing, it'll get lost in the noise. We know those campaigns that might be, I don't want to say riskier, but they kind of push it a little bit. They're sort of, they're still authentic to themselves, but they take it up a notch, and those are the ones that stand out. So when those sort of things, like your competition, your clients really well, you can go, oh, this is how we can kind of like turn these dials up on these areas so that you can be a little bit more, you can attract a little bit more attention, and you can stand out a little further, because it's just, as we know, it's just getting noisier and noisier out there, because there's a lot of just average marketing, average messaging that's going out there. No one's really, saying anything really pointing it, because everybody wants to fit in, but no one wants to stand out, which the whole point of marketing is standing out so people find you.
Absolutely. And that's so true. And like we talked before the show, is like small business has a very tough time in the marketing area, because either they don't have enough money or they don't know what they're doing and they got to DIY it and that kind of thing. I think that's where your book comes in to help, because it talks about the customer. You got to know your competitor, like you just touched on, your what you're going to sell and your why you're going to sell it, or the product or service. All those are so key when developing a marketing strategy, right?
Yeah. Well, the way I laid it out was building a framework of here's 4 easy steps. It's kind of when before you start, just know some simple things, like, are all your assets ready, or do you have your logo ready, or what, make a plan of what you might need in the future. Like, just sit and think before you start talking to a designer about things, because again, it's the next step is, how do you find the team? How do you, what questions to ask the team, and then how to run the project. So it's broken into 4 sections. One is kind of like, get all your stuff ready over here. So you kind of know what you need, know what you want. So then the next step being, like, when you're hiring your team, you can find a team that fits exactly, the needs that you want, and kind of will do what it wants. And then the next is like running the project, making sure, like, who has sign off, who's running it, checklists, all those sort of things. And then the final one is like, when the project wraps, understand, everything from invoicing, or backing things up, where all your files saved, for instance. Because one of the reasons why I wrote the book is I had a friend come to me because their designer lost all of their files. Their hard drive crashed. They called up and said, "Hey, we're ready to a new brochure this year," and the designer said, "Sorry, our computer crashed. We lost everything." It left my client in a lurch. It's sort of their friend in a lurch, because my first question when they called me to ask me what they can do, I'm like, where's your files? Where's your copies of everything? And they just again assumed that they assumed that that's kind of that the designer was always going to have them, but no, none of the paperwork, none of the contracts ever said that they were responsible for it. So again, this impetus of these things that we don't know as small business owners, we learn very high level things, but we're also wearing so many hats all at once, and we're juggling so many things. So I really, part of this book and part of this checklist and how it was sort of built is sort of like somebody can go in and out really quickly. Oh, I got to learn about this. Oh, here I can jump in. Here's some 5 things I need to know. And also one of the things that each one of the points at the bottom has essentially blind spots. So if you don't do them, here's maybe the repercussions of it. So I made it really sort of accessible in a way of sort of, if they don't need to read the whole thing to understand it all, but if they're ready to hire a designer, well, they can go to that chapter and read, all the things that, what would I do if I was going to hire, if all the good and bad lessons I've learned as an entrepreneur, as someone that hires people, as contractors, what are all those? And, here's now my list of what I would ask. It doesn't go too far and too deep or too complicated, but just here's some high level stuff that you should know. And like even for instance, like, does there an NDA need to be signed? Make sure you have a contract in place. All those things that, hey, they're my neighbor's son, so of course he's going to fulfill what he says he's going to fulfill. But you never know, and especially when money is involved and you're a small business, every dollar counts. So I'm really trying to help small businesses get the most out of their teams, out of the project, so that they have money to invest in and keep themselves afloat and make it easier for them. Because it's it's really tough as an entrepreneur in small business sometimes.
Absolutely. And going back to the file thing and the missing files, I love one of the quotes that you had in the book was, and I wrote it down, was assumption is the mother of all F ups. How true is that? Really?
Yes.
You assume it, you're going to mess it. That's classic. I love that line.
It came from a Steven Seagal movie, and it was Dark Territory 2, and it just the bad one of the henchmen thought as they're fighting, one of the henchmen thought he saw Steven Seagal's character fall off the train, and when he goes back to talk to the boss asks, like, what happened? You're all good? And he goes, well, I think you fell off the train. And hence, he said this is where that line comes in. Assumption is the mother of all f ups, because once you start assuming, there's that gap in there. And another really key quote in the book that really kind of resonated with me is, with any project, your blind spot isn't what you don't know, but it's what everybody else assumes you know, right? So if you're a small business and designers or people that you're working with, they might assume that or have thought through things. Meanwhile, you have no idea if that wasn't even a question to be asked to begin with. So that's really where, it's time, effort, money, budgets, like stuff gets wasted or those things break very quickly. And that's kind of, again, those assumptions that we leave out. And unfortunately, schools don't really teach that on either side. And this is one of the things that I taught in design school, and they teach the kids how to design, how to do beautiful logos and brochures and how to use the programs, but they don't teach how to do business with other people. How do you communicate? How do you run a project, which is, one of the most basic things of, interviewing a client, getting all that stuff, like all of those bits and pieces. They don't teach that on both sides. I shouldn't say just on design side, but also in business school, some of those things that they gloss over them quickly, but, they're also very important things. So as I think about probably should be taught in school is finances and things like that. Like sometimes the most important things are just kind of left to chance. And that's kind of, I'm trying to fill that gap is, on multiple levels there. So.
Yeah. And you look at that, that's a very good point, because when I was in school, and I'm much older than you are, but when I was in school, they taught you how to balance a checkbook, how to write a check, and those kind of things. Now, nobody knows what a check is anymore, but still, they taught us those kind of things, and now nobody gets that.
Nope.
And nobody, I mean, to run a team, and one of your whole sections is about getting your team together
Yeah.
and running a team. That's so important.
Yeah. Yep. How do you hire somebody who might have a team, or what are their resources? Because sometimes one of the key things is like if you hire a designer or any kind of contractor, a key thing too, if you really like them or they've got a actually, even to back up further, even if before you hire the team, we suggest everybody get references in, things like that, because it's some industries. It's just a word of mouth and like, oh, they've done this before, but contractual work and design work, it's a different thing. It's not like accounting where you give receipts and it's not a very, like, accounting seems very tangible. Like you give in your receipts and you get a ledger afterwards, and that's kind of, there's nothing intangible in between that. But consulting and marketing and branding, like when someone's doing a logo or any of that stuff, it's very kind of intangible. So it's good to not just look at their portfolio, but also interview past clients and people that they've worked with to see how that experience is. And also, if you find somebody, sometimes their team might be deeper, so that if you're hiring somebody to do web design, do they know a writer? What other sort of consultants do they work in their circle that they like and that they really enjoy, kind of that they enjoy working together as well? Because that's really key. Is once you find a really good one, keep asking if they know any, what is their network like, because that helps you as well.
I'm a member of the Chamber of Commerce. We are very involved with the Chamber of Commerce. But you go to these meetings, whether it's a marketing meeting or whatever, and you're meeting these people, you can't help but hit 4 or 5 digital marketers in the head with the dead cat. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Swinging and that's just the way it is. That's why it's so important to go through what you're saying and through your checklist is like, hey, you need to see their portfolio, but you got to go deeper than that.
Yeah. Yep. It's again that value of just don't take anybody by their word. Not that on an untrustworthy standpoint, but everybody works at different levels and different paces, and it's also about finding that right business fit for you too. Like some people are more methodical, some people are just will grind it out, and it's finding those good fits. And you don't have to sign those long-term contracts. You can try little things out just to see if they are that good fit personally, but also from how do they run their business, and that's super important to know. And how ethical is a very heavy word, but it's also too, are they how are they with getting your project done? And it's nothing to start off small and kind of work on something and see if it is a fit, because they're almost like another employee in your business, and you kind of almost have to treat them like that, not just as a external contractor, but it's really good to kind of think of them as would they be a good fit inside the company with everybody else? Are your values the same? Or the sort of like the work ethic and what you're trying to achieve, are those things the same as you, right? So just talking to one of them, or just hiring one of them who might have the best deal, might not be the best fit. And that's kind of where that balance happens. As we all know, the cheapest is not cheapest is sometimes far from the best. So
right. My dad always told me you get what you pay for, right?
It could not be truer, right? So, and that's really key. So just go in and talk. I think a really key thing about this book that is about just asking questions. It's okay to just play dumb, be like, I've never done this before. How would you do this? And kind of have them walk through their process. I actually, I watched this one corporate negotiator, very high level corporate negotiator. I just, to this day, I probably saw him about 20 years ago, but when people say things and they just stick in your brain because they're so, you can use them almost every day in your life. And one of the things that he says is that as a negotiator, one of the things that he would walk into the room and be like, tell me your problem like a 5-year-old, and then, it's just, there's a bunch of just being able, someone lowering their ego and, everything that kind of the emotion and everything else that comes in some of these situations, but just try to explain it in the most plain way that you possibly can. So I can understand. And he said, just the level, just not even the explanation, but you also see, both from not a technical side, but from like a list or mathematical, but also from an emotional side, what might drive them on those sides. And that to me was just always, approaching life with the eyes and thought of a 5-year-old of just explain it to me, because it just leaves the door so wide open for you to understand things in a different way and for you to learn things and to, keep asking questions. And that's so important as an entrepreneur, as busy as it is. Like, just teach me, because you never know. Sometimes they might say something that just might open up another door for another part of the business or help you in some other part of the business. And that's always been really key, is just have people talk and explain to you and walk you through it. So yeah.
I want to go back to this fit thing that you were talking about because it's so important. And I'll give you a perfect example that have a business I was working with, still working with them, and they're ready to take it to the next level. So they decided to hire a particular marketing firm, and they do. And they're paying them, enough a month to get things done. But my client never really gave them a deadline to finish things. They got them finished,
Yeah.
but it wasn't what he thought it should be. He thought it should be at a certain time. And he's saying, I'm firing them. I'm firing them. They were doing an okay job. I said, well, did you ever tell them the deadline you wanted? And he's like, no, I never told him. Well, that's your own dadgum fault.
So here's something we've also, part of spending money is also seeing what, the ROI, or return on investment, is on that. And I think one of the things I would have, people hiring a team is how do you measure the results? It's great that you do all these things, but at what, how are we getting the results? How are we also, I wouldn't say just if they're successful or not, but even when you get the results back, maybe how to change or how to shift things one way or another. Oh, what happens if we do it over here? You can then create a better, more really targeted and better message, better sort of product. So as it gets better, the spending kind of comes down because now you're reaching more people. Now the targets, everything's now more on target. You're not blasting it out, but you're being so much more targeted with the specific people. And then, you're spending less. So me, what I'd really sort of say is it's not just deadlines, but also those check-ins. How are you measuring all the various parts of the campaigns or whatever's marketing and branding that you're doing? But yeah, put in, again, that team part of the one of the questions is what is that team's kind of work back schedule, and in running a project is what is their project process, and in that roadmap, what does that look like? And if they don't have one, or they've never built one for a company, it's again, there's no deadline, and it keeps it wide open. And again, there's no goals. Here's another thing too, is like if there's no deadline, there's no big goals to hit. There's nothing for everybody to kind of work towards. And again, that's really tough as a team. If you're just kind of doing stuff to do it. But I'm a goal oriented person in that. For I like deadlines. I like things to kind of to have that finish line to kind of feel accomplished. But also, okay, how did that? That was great. But like every game, or even like going back to the marathon thing, it's great that you run the marathon at this for this time. But hey, you know what? I want to do the next one. I want to beat that time. And that's kind of that mentality of. When it comes to marketing, you can do that. And there's so many tools out there that you can do this with, that it's sort of put something in to help measure stuff for you, because it shows you where your money is going, where to invest, where not to invest the next time. Otherwise, you're just kind of like throwing money at stuff just to make people work and make it happen. And that's kind of, you might hear a little frustration in my voice, because that's kind of, it frustrates me when, I hear these stories, because it's just kind of wasted money from an entrepreneurial side that could be used better to grow their business or to invest in product. Like just all these other things that investment or the cash could have gone to, or could go to help grow that business in so many other ways, rather than just kind of being used to, for pretty pictures and just to put something out on a regular basis.
When you talk about holding the accountability part, where you're holding yourself accountable and your team accountable and getting things accomplished and to get an ROI, it does really start with a goal. Do you sit down with your new client and say, what is your goal? I know you do, but and is it very, very specific? Like, we're going to grow 10% in sales, or we're going to add X number of customers, or we're going to, is it that's specific?
So in the beginning, here's the kind of some things. I think one of the things that we also teach our clients and sort of talk to them about is like at the beginning, in building that brand and understanding who the clients are, it's best to keep some of those goals a little softer, because until so over time, and that, again, that's where those sort of those milestones come in, because you can go out and be like, okay, we're gonna do this. How did that work? Okay, how can we keep on tweaking it? How can we keep on growing it? Because then as you go further and further, the more you kind of understand and build stuff, the more tighter you can get those goals and be like, okay, now our messaging on, we now have all the materials that we need to go out and do this. Here's those targets. So just to go back to the beginning of the question, is like at the beginning, it's really tough for them to say, hey, we need a brochure and we need to get 10 new clients out of this. but you don't really, again, what are those, who are those clients? And let's go out and, let's try our best to get as many as we can. But that's soft goals is where I would start, because it's a learning process. And, you're not going to see some of the results right away, because it is about that understanding, tweaking. Social media is very much about, you can reiterate things and see what lands. And that's kind of, that's another big thing that we use and play with. It's like using all the tools and all the platforms and medium that you can to get a better sort of marketing message, or marketing devices, whether it's a brochure or email or whatever that kind of looks like. And going back even further to the question of like, who are your customers? What is their buying cycle like? And understanding them as as an industry of, when and where do they buy? And that's kind of the whole part of that strategic planning. And that's also, when you have that information, the better decisions you can make, in goal planning and things like that. So really understanding, them to that level, or at what times of year what time of years do they buy, and things like that. I was just listening to a podcast, and they were asking like, what day do you think is KFC's busiest day of the year? And some people were thinking Christmas and everything else, but it's Mother's Day, funnily enough. So, these random outliers, but, they watch those, and that's sort of, but if everybody's, if you're, if you didn't know that or never captured those numbers, you might think Christmas might be a big one, or like picnic season, but Mother's Day is by far the largest, sales day for KFC, because, so mom doesn't have to cook. So that is about understanding, but also, hey, if you're launching in September, but Mother's Day is in May. Well, now you've got a 6-month window there. Like, what can we do? Don't try to hit all your sales targets in those 6 months, because that's kind of where things are. So again, that's the more research you do, the tighter and the better decisions you can make, and the more thoughtful you can do on ramping things up, and So that was a very long question. To your short, long answer to your short question.
But it encompasses so much. When you're looking at your goal, it encompasses all that. Your competitor, you, how you're going to do it, and what you're saying is, what I think you're saying is, you got to refine that message and refine it down until you get to that target. To find out what hits them and makes them move. So, I mean, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And you mentioned,
not just message, but the mediums as well, whether or not an email campaign, or also giving things enough time to kind of stick a little bit too, and that's part of it. But just trying, again, that research of like, where your customers showing up, and how might you kind of, pique their interest. And that's super key.
There's one other part I definitely wanted to get into before we got off this call: the strategy versus tactics.
Yes. Yep.
That blew me away when I started reading that. Kind of help us through that, because it's two different things.
From an emotional or sort of, thoughtful standpoint, strategy is very much understanding, again, the research, the insights that you have, and planning something. You're playing the long game. You're understanding, where you're again, the kind of KFC analogy thing. If you're launching in September, and your big sale days in May, it's about the strategizing everything leading up to that, without just firing a bunch of text. I think strategy, it's a little bit, it's a bigger ship to move, and a lot of people like to see things done. And so strategy is using airplane mode. It's the 10,000-foot view of everything, and planning out exactly where you're going to go, and marking in these little milestones of how you're going to get there. But it takes time. It's that long game. Tactics are how you're going to execute said strategy. Using the KFC reference again, if your demographic of moms are on Instagram or on TikTok leading up to that, that's the tactical thing. Is you build a bunch of ads, and that's where you show up as a restaurant or something else. That's where you show up. That's strategically where you show up. So tactics are very much how things get done. But I think a lot of people get caught up in the tactics of things because it feels the most constructive. They feel like they're doing things. When you're producing something, it feels like you're being productive and you're growing the business, rather than just sort of being sort of strategic about it. So that's again, that difference, the big picture. And I think with strategy is about doing those small moves, testing and playing things out with, sometimes it doesn't feel I didn't say it's not. Doesn't feel like you're not getting stuff done, but it is the bigger game. It is winning the season and not just focused on that. That one game, which everyone counts, but it's kind of what does a season look like versus that one specific game that maybe you pour everything into, but you now have another 30 games to play in that season, kind of thing. So that's really being strategic over being kind of tactical in that time. And again, that's kind of the analogy, but it is. I think people fall into tactics because they feel as though they're doing something and are being constructive and kind of being productive. And that's kind of where it comes from.
Do you think that's a form of procrastination when you start focusing more on the tactics than the strategy, or is it, or do you have to have the tactics?
Good, yeah, you do, because that's the tactics come in of how you're going to implement the strategy. I think maybe another thing would be it would be anxiety. I would say that might be the feeling people would get from it, because if they don't feel like they're doing enough, that's maybe where some of the tactics, like I need to do more, I need to produce more, and kind of like you're flooding everything just from kind of sheer anxiety. But if it's sort of, again, if you understand that, sort of you do that, gather those research and those insights. I kind of keep on saying that, but it's sort of, once you have that, you're making those decisions. But if you don't, know where and how to show up and what to do and what to build, you're just kind of, it's like throwing something at the wall and hoping it sticks, as the saying goes, right? You're kind of, and that's where tactics come in versus the strategy. You're just kind of producing things, just trying out a million things rather than trying, a million different kind of things in all different directions, versus possibly 10 really insightful, thoughtful things that, know it's going to work. But, it's the difference between doing 10 to 100. A lot of people just feel more productive. They're building the business, and there's a sense of accomplishment when you do those 100 things versus those 10. But part of it is just when you are strategic, it lightens the load, and you can kind of build more around it. It leaves space to do other things, other tactical things, without just filling your time with stuff to do. And that's kind of, talking from an entrepreneurial standpoint, also it's when you're an entrepreneur, when you feel like you're doing stuff, you feel like you're accomplishing things and the business is growing. And that's kind of it's hard to stop and just kind of let the business grow and watch it. Actually, that's a big thing that we tell entrepreneurs to do, is just sit back, or small businesses, just let's try something and sit and watch it, see what the implications are, not just kind of keep on throwing stuff out, because then you can't really test, or you can't really see if something works, in the best possible way.
When you start looking at it and you want the big picture and you're wanting to move your business forward, some of the things you're going to throw out there is not going to work.
Yeah. Yep.
And now you've learned something that you need to refine to go back at it.
Yep.
We talk about that all the time, that it's not failure, it's feedback. It's giving you golden opportunities to refine and move forward.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable.
No, it is. And it's just sort of test, but again, test with insight, test with knowledge, and with like, here's, again, just if you just learn a little bit about something, or just learn the background of it. So the testing goes from something that's maybe very broad to something a little bit narrower. So you're not testing 50 things, you're testing 10 things, and you're seeing where those 10 things kind of land, and being very conscious of that, of just understanding. And the window of, if you want to just call it failure, or of your time wasted, if you kind of take, rather than doing those 100 things, just spend a little bit more of that time doing, learning a little bit, watching a little bit, getting those insights, and then make 10 decisions of here's 10 different things I'd like to try, and let's go at this based on what I've kind of learned here. Are my assumptions correct? Is my way of thinking correct? It's just, I think sometimes entrepreneurs don't give themselves enough credit in the fact that they're in their business every day, and they have so much knowledge in their brain about all these little things. And I think sometimes it just, they need that space, or also they should have an agency or someone that can extract that from them as well, and give them that space or those ways to extract some of that really deep knowledge that that they've learned over the course of business, or as they're building things out. And that was something. That was some of our biggest lessons were learned from, like, for instance, other departments or other people within a business that have insight that no one bothered to ask before, and things like that. So that's also another thing. You can learn a ton of insights and a ton of knowledge just by interviewing, for instance, in a retail shop, some of the staff, get them to test out certain, different things, or say, hey, how did those t-shirts sell this week, or how did, how are the, it's, you can look at look at different things, or ask different people of, their thoughts, or how something worked, and gather that information. I think, it was I can't count how many times we've built something for a company. The marketing department says, hey, we need a brochure, and we build a beautiful brochure, and then we show it to everybody, and the sales guys are like, we haven't sent out a brochure in like 5 years. One of those things is like, we're just doing stuff, and that's kind of, and they're like, no, we send everything out via email. This is what we do over here. And it's kind of, well, no one talked to sales, those sort of things. So those kind of insights are really, just talking to that larger group. And again, that's kind of the getting, the first chapter is not just even about assets, but just talking to your team as a whole, being like, hey, if we were to do something, what would you think would be helpful for us to do to achieve these goals? For instance, like for us to sell more t-shirts or cupcakes, or expand our services, like where do you see that clients are, how we can help clients, or where do you see the most that we're missing with clients? And that's really key. And also, a huge thing that everybody kind of forgets is that your past clients are such an immensely deep well of knowledge of, you just ask them like, hey, why do you use us? Why do you buy our products? Or why do you hire us for our services? Or all those things. And, the amount of really honest and authentic answers you're going to get from that, it's gold. You're not going to find it anywhere else. And that's just something you can pour back into your messaging and things like that, because that's, if they're your clients and they resonate and they keep on coming back because of something, well, it's, that's that messaging, and that connection is something you can then kind of like build into, some of the marketing, some of the messaging, all the other stuff that you do to then help narrow it down and find other people exactly like your key clients.
Yes, I mean, we could talk about this all night. I know you.
Yeah, no, I love talking about it. So
because there's a couple more questions that I have that I don't know that we have time for. But
well, listen, I'll keep the answers short. So just
so one of the things was that in there that I thought was amazing. You talking about future needs, and I guess it kind of goes hand in hand with the goal setting thing, but it's a little bit bigger than that.
It actually piggyback exactly really well with what ask different departments what they need. Like some of the small businesses, have the sales, have other like events or other sort of things. Like just everybody who has one of the things I would highly suggest, and this is a very simple answer, is like everybody who has a touch point or a touch with a client, just ask them if they need anything, or what's in the next year. What are their goals? What are their plans? For someone doing PR, or if they're running events, trade shows. If it's out of your department, just go around and ask what needs they might have, and that way too, it's now you're combining. Now you're not having 5 different people do it, but if you can combine some of those services, and I gotta say, us as an agency, it's really awesome to think that like when we're building something out for a client and branding, I think is like if they have a trade show in in 6 to 8 months, we have that in the back of our mind, and now all the messaging, all the sort of stuff that we're building, we're also kind of thinking like, oh, we need to put that on a booth somewhere, some stand-up banners, all that stuff. But now we can kind of the brand itself, like it's just all the pieces can kind of fit so much more succinctly together. And also from a cost standpoint, it's sort of, we know that's coming up. Do they want to produce it now? Because, if we work on it now, there's a chance it's going to be a lot less expensive than if we were to do it again. If we've got to pick up everything and start from scratch, pick up everything and start everything again, it could be more. So if we can kind of pack some more stuff in or understand what that is, from a planning and building standpoint, an analogy would be if you're looking to build a house, and you want multiple rooms, but right now it's just going to be, a 1-story, 1-bedroom kind of house. But the goal is to build multiple stories, multiple rooms. Just pour the foundation, or just sort of like it's a lot, it's a lot cheaper to pour that foundation now, and do something with it than to kind of like have someone like tear it down and do all that over again. So those little small things, and ask your agency, here's our ideas. How would you approach this, and how best can we work with you guys to kind of save us time, money, and things like that in that big picture. But again, it comes down to talking, asking questions, and in the big picture, what does that look like for everybody?
I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being on. Your book is out on Amazon called Blindspots Handbook.
Yep.
And how to prepare for what you don't see coming.
Yep.
So it's a fascinating book. So I appreciate you allowing us to talk to you tonight about it for sure.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure. Something I've always, when I'm talking and speaking, if anybody has any problems or anything they need to kind of work through, if they have a blind spot that they've just hit, or something they've hit with a blind spot, reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'll be more than happy to kind of mentor them through that process and help them in any way too, because nothing's worse than kind of being in a bad situation. And so if any of your listeners are having an issue with their creative team or wondering how to approach some problems that they have, feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to kind of mentor and help them through it. So that's they can find me right on LinkedIn, and that's probably the best way for them to kind of connect. But more than happy to kind of give back and help out where I can.
That's fantastic and very generous, and I appreciate that. And I guarantee my audience does too. That's very cool and very nice. Anything else that you wanted to touch on before we got off here?
No, I honestly, great conversation. We dove into so much here. I think there's lots, and honestly, we could talk all night. So we could, in 6 months we can come back to this and open up a whole other conversation. So many more questions, but yeah, one of the things is just don't assume, and just ask questions, and that's one of the biggest things. It's just and obviously if you get that feeling in your gut, just pass on it, because that's that's one of the biggest things. And reach out if you have any questions, and more than happy to help. And that's exactly why I wrote this book, so that it would help small business entrepreneurs get more out of their teams, get more out of their budgets, and be more successful, because we need more small businesses, don't we?
We do. We
Yep.
absolutely do.
Yep.
Yeah, Brady Dahmer, Blindspots Handbook. Go pick it up. It's very practical, which is a lot different than a lot of other books out there. It's very practical, and that's a
Thank you so much.
fantastic deal.
Yeah,
Brady, thank you so much for your time, man.
you're very welcome. Thanks so much. It was great being interviewed by you. So, yep, fantastic.
We'll talk soon.
See ya.